where are the jobs? You know, this is not an easy time. But the answers aren't difficult. If you figure out what caused the problem, the answers aren't difficult, because I am convinced that we have not had enough freedom in this country, not enough respect for private property, not enough respect for spending money. Trouble that way, guess what the solution ought to be? Just send people to Washington who have read the Constitution and will obey it. Distortion of the Constitution, and this idea that the Constitution is something that's flexible and you have to adapt to modern times without amending it. That's where the real problem is. But the misuse of the Interstate Commerce Clause, the misuse of the General Welfare Clause, the ignoring of the Monetary Clause, and the ignoring of the Fourth Amendment, invasion of our privacy, the ignoring of the Declaration of War, these are the things we need to remind the American people and all the politicians that we need to stick to our guns and obey the Constitution, and we will solve our problems. A lot of people claim that will take a lot of sacrifice, and we'll have to really sacrifice and buckle down. You know, I don't even think of it as sacrifice. If we can restore liberty to the people, get rid of the income tax. No bailouts to the rich. Foreign adventurism and bringing our troops home and saving all that. Our civil liberties, because that's how you bring people together. Not by dividing us and thinking of us in different groups and what privileges we get and no penalties for groups. If we can just bring people together and say we all should come together because we're individuals, we all should be have equal protection under the law. Should not be one sacrifice. The people who are worried about it and been warned and screamed and hollered 4 or 5 years ago, you need to bail us out, you need to take care of us, we're too big to fail, there's a depression coming. Well, they need a depression. The guys have been living off us, but not the people. This is what happened when the fight hit after the individuals involved in the Fannie Mae's and the Freddie Macs and the Goldman Sachs, and they needed the bailout. And the program, like a housing program, was essentially designed to help poor people. It was well motivated, but the whole idea didn't work. Prompting the government or insisting government make bad loans didn't make a lot of sense. Guess who made a lot of money when the bubble was being blown out? The very wealthy. But they got the bailout. The middle class lost their jobs, and they lost their houses. We have to rethink this entitlement system, because when you do the entitlement system with the pretense of helping the poor, tragically, you end up helping the rich and you make more poor in this country. Pay a lot of attention to protecting our privacy. Government was established, our government was established, mainly to have a republic, to have a small government, and to have open government, so that we know what our government's doing. And the people's privacy would be protected. That's why they gave us the Fourth Amendment, because privacy was not protected under the dictatorship of the king. And when this was passed, it seemed like it would work, but in the last several years, especially in the last 10 years, it hasn't been working very well. Because the one bill that has caused more harm, and we do need to repeal it, that is the Patriot Act. Should be to protect the privacy, not the secrecy of the government. And a good place to start part to reverse that is expose the Fed to what they're doing and have a full self-destruct. The whole problem is if you don't do it in a deliberate fashion and an organized fashion, it can be very bad because it ends up in runaway inflation and high interest rates. It ends up with economic turmoil as well as political turmoil. That's what we have to try to prevent. And that is the reason my modest suggestion to get us back on track is to get the budget down. And that's the reason I want to cut $1 trillion out of the budget. That with having priorities. People say, oh, the government's not going to spend $1 trillion. How many people are going to suffer? Well, there are people who are living off the government they might. Maybe some foreign beneficiaries. Maybe people getting foreign aid. What about these wars that we're involved in? We are involved in so many countries. We're in over 150 countries. We have over 900 bases. And now they're putting troops in and they're planning to stir up trouble in Syria with the intent that we're supposed to go and start a war and fight a war in Iran. We don't need any more wars. We need go back a couple of years. My proposal go back to the budget of 2006. The government wasn't very small then, but we could do that. The reason I advise that is if we have some programs that maybe deserve a little more protection. There are some that even I wouldn't have strongly endorsed, but we have taught that people to be so dependent, like medical care for the elderly, Social Security benefits. Those programs, they're broke, but the promises were made and how are they going to be taken care of? Child health care. I believe very sincerely that we can protect those programs if we have the priorities, but we have to change our foreign policy. Right. And that we have to admit, changing our foreign policy isn't the easiest thing to do in a Republican primary. And but the tremendous benefit from a program like that is to work on this whole principle of the people you can bring together, the coalition you can build. The same way on independent liberty, you bring individuals together because their liberty is used by themselves, but you can bring people together on foreign policy. There's a lot of good Republicans now. As a matter of fact, George Bush Jr. in the year 2000 on a humble foreign policy and no nation building and not to be the police in the world. That's a pretty good foreign policy. That's what we're talking about. So, we should have Republicans who want to support it. We have a lot of independents support this. We have progressive Democrats that are willing to support this. And when you think of financially the need for this and having a trade-off stop some of the fighting overseas that accomplishes nothing, probably the one thing, bad thing it accomplishes, it builds more enemies. But at least we could tide ourselves over and work our way out. If we continue to spend overseas and all these pilot programs and bail out everybody and not cut anything, nobody else is talking about making cuts. In Washington, the Republican proposal says that, well, we're going to nibble at the proposed increases and in 30 years we're going to have a balanced budget. That's not being very serious. But if we want to do that, we have to cut, and I believe we can work our way out of it. So it is a problem that if it is not solved, the spending will lead to even bigger debt. Right now, our deficit is running close to $1.5 trillion a year, and the debt is now at $16 trillion. We're the biggest debtor on foreign nations, the biggest in the history of the world. And which countries are we owing to? Countries that we used to condemn for their communism, like China. We owe them the money, and they can hold us hostage because of this. But we have lived beyond our means. And if an individual lives beyond his or her means, The only way they get back on their feet again when they run out of credit is they have to cut back, they have to sell something, they have to work harder, and they have to get rid of the debt. It is not different as a nation. Now, liberal economists will argue with me quite frequently that no, a nation is different than an individual. What a nation does when it's broke is it's supposed to spend more money. The deficit is endless, and they're supposed to print more money. And they've been doing it now for 5 years, and they wonder why the economy's in the doldrums. And really, our economy and our standard of living has been going down since the year 2000 with the collapse of the NASDAQ bubble. And it got much worse in 08 with the collapse of the housing bubble. So this has been slipping and sliding for a long time. And you know, there is one statistic that is a mixed statistic, because some people say, hey, this is great, and I think it's an indication of a serious problem. You know, between the year 1995 and the year 2000, there were 2.9 million individuals, people coming from Mexico, illegal and legal. And in the last 5 years, between 2005 and 2010, that went down over 50%. It went from 2.9 down to 1.3. So it was a collapse of the people coming into this country. People, well, that's great. You know, this is wonderful. But guess what? There were more people leaving than there were coming in. So this sort of puts this whole immigration thing into proper perspective. But you say, well, is it because they're obeying the law, or because they're threatening people? No, you know what I think it is? That we're not as attractive as we used to be. We don't have the economy. My goal is to have a healthy, thriving economy and have a much more sensible immigration policy where we can invite people to come in and have them come in much easier with work permits and come back and forth and make it best for all of us. But you can't do that with the rest. You want to beef up the immigration services to facilitate it and make it more efficient? Yes, but where are you going to get the money? We get it from us worrying too much about the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. When we have a lot more immigrants and illegals coming in, I had a lot of people come to my congressional office, and they were interested, how do I get some people to come in, because I need jobs, Americans won't take the jobs, and how can we do this? So even in the midst of all this condemnation of immigrants coming in, there was, a need. We now, I think we have, 600,000 jobs are going vacant in this country, and people aren't well enough trained. So we have a problem here. To blame the world and blame Chinese for our problems or blame immigration as our problem, we have to look to ourselves and decide what is wrong. You know, one of the excuses they use for us to be in the Middle East, the neoconservatives say, well, we have an obligation. We are an exceptional nation. We have exceptional values. And there's no Soviet Union, so now we're king of the world. And we have this obligation to spread our goodness around the world, even if we have to use force. I think that makes no sense whatsoever. A reminder of the Jacobins in the French Revolution. You'll do it our way. We want to do all these wonderful good things and create this beautiful democracy. If you don't do what we tell you, we chop your head off. And, there is a better way, because I happen to have strong beliefs that our country is, at least in the past, and we have a good history. We have a history of a great constitution. Once we're the wealthiest country in the world. We had the biggest middle class. And we have been exceptional in many ways, and we still have a lot of exceptional values, and I want to spread them. And my suggestion is, that we restore that confidence in our freedoms and restore our confidence in our laws and our Constitution, make ourselves a society that people will respect and they will want to emulate, set a good standard of sound money and progress. Sometimes use a medical term, I think it's schizophrenic. Because, how many friendly dictators did we have, and we turn around later on, we had to fight? Ben Laden was on our side one time, Saddam Hussein was on our side, Ortega's been on our side one time. It's going on. How about Mubarak? How many billions of dollars did the American people have to send to the dictator of Egypt? And then, that fell down. We had to help the dissidents, and then we throw him out. And now I think, as far as buying friendship for Israel, I think that's worse than ever. And guess what? The people taking over Egypt right now are infiltrated with Al-Qaeda, as it is in Libya, as it is in Syria. So this is why the founders were correct. There's no authority for us to do it. The founders were correct. Mind our own business, get it out of the internal affairs of all other nations. People that believe in that, you're about isolationist. You don't want to deal with the world. You don't want to be involved. But that isn't true, because those very individuals that might throw that term out at us as isolationists are the ones who always want to use sanctions. They want to put sanctions on countries, on Syria, on Iran, and cause trouble, hurt the people. Maybe the people then will overthrow their government. But the whole thing is, you put on sanctions, you hurt the people. They know who did it, and they hate more Americans. They hate Americans, not their own. And then they come together for a sense of nationalism. Those individuals who talk about us being isolationists, they're the ones who, after 50 years, don't want to talk to Castro and don't want to work with Cuba. I understand we talk to the Cubans and trade with Cubans and travel. Foreign policy, I think the worst example is with Pakistan. Because my claim used to be that we have two policies, we have two options. We go to them, and if they buy into what we offer and we prop up their dictator, we give them a lot of money. If they don't do what we want, then we bomb. So we have a lot of money for bomb. And of course, I want a little bit of diplomacy and a little bit of friendship. But what we do with Pakistan is we give money to the government of Pakistan, and we constantly bomb the people. I mean, we can go together. And then they wonder why, and that causes the conflict between the people. They hate their government, and then they say, well, it's unstable in Pakistan. Well, it's an unstable society to begin with, but I don't think we're helping out a whole lot. Assuming war on terrorism, global war on terrorism. And with these drones going around, we claim that we can hit any spot and they have the technology to do it. Obama wanted to be so adamant about it and brag about it. He says, we have the authority now. If we have an American citizen and we can't capture them, we can just assassinate them with a drone, and that's what they've done. Another family member of that family, and he was told, well, a family member knows all about it, he's part of the problem. He was born an American citizen also, and he was 16 years old. He was assassinated while he was barbecuing with his cousin. And this is made law of the land under an executive order. Those are the kind of laws a constitutional president would never obey and would repeal them by another. We have drifted a long way from the Constitution and what the founders advised as foreign policy. It's a big, big issue. And 70% of the American people now are swell. They agree with this position. They say, come on, we've had enough of Afghanistan. I remember so clearly in the 60s, because I was drafted in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis as well as during the Vietnam period. I did it for 5 years. And it was a utter tragedy. 60,000 Americans died, and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, came back. And even later on, as a physician and in Congress, I had to deal with and continue to deal with veterans not getting benefits from even wars back as far as Vietnam. And what about the men and women coming back from the injuries now from Iraq and Afghanistan? They're not getting well treated. There's an epidemic of suicide. We're losing more military personnel from suicide now from the battlefield. To do is they use the term stop the bleeding, stop the wars, and then concentrate. This is one area that we do have a moral obligation and a constitutional authority to take care of those individuals we sent over erroneously and badly. But I went because I believe, like so many of us, that it's our duty to try to do our very best. But really, the responsibility falls on those individuals in the government. And I've told my veterans back at home that, yes, I was drafted, I went and did my very best, but I've learned to disapprove of our foreign policy. But now, having been in Washington, I voted in the Congress, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, I have a different obligation to stand up and tell people. So this is what I did as early as 1998. They were changing the law. They changed the law and said the law now is to overthrow Saddam Hussein. That was the first speech I did in 1998. Invading Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And here is an individual that we were allies with. Iraq got their first nuclear reactor years before with our help. But and then we wonder about why we're doing so poorly with relationship with the Iranians. Well, of course, in 1953, what did we do? We overthrew an elected leader, Mossadegh, and Americans seem to have no memory. But the Arab and Muslims seem to never forget. And they remember, and that is what prompted the 1978 overthrow of the Shah. So, but what else did we do later on to sort of antagonize and stir up this problem over there is that we instigated and supported Saddam Hussein. Invasion of and fighting for about 8 or 9 years against the Iranians. The Iranians know this. So it just makes no sense. It is coming to an end. Even when I talk to audiences that I know they disagree with me, no, we're defending America, we're defending our Constitution, we're defending our freedoms. And I say, well, you can argue that. I said, but tell you what, we're going to win the argument. Our side will win the argument. Because the majority's coming with us, but you really win the argument, unfortunately, when you bankrupt the country, and that's what we're facing today. Bin Laden, it wasn't an accident that he promoted. He actually wrote and said what he was doing and why he was doing it. And he had three things that he had several things he wanted to do. One he wanted to do with attacking us was to draw us into some country in the Middle East to get bogged down in the war. To his surprise, we did more than one country. We really got bogged down. The other thing that he wanted to do was to cause dissent in this country over war. He was probably thinking about the dissent of the 1960s. And he also wanted to contribute to the financial crisis in this country. And it just seems like we're blinded to that, because all of a sudden, if you say anything like this, you're un-American, you don't support the troops, you don't care about it. Well, I'm pleased to say that we get more money from the troops than all the other ones put together.